I'm one of the health promotion workers. I work for Waverley Care, and I'm based with the community projects team at Mansfield Place in Edinburgh. We used to have a centre with a cafe, and so at that time food was, you know, really at the heart of what we did, and a really easy entry point, a really relaxed entry point for people to come in, have a cup of tea, bit of cake, lunch, whatever it was. And meet other people, get a sense of what was going on, that kind of thing. More recently we've moved to some offices which no longer have a cafe, but we've tried to keep kind of healthy eating and work around food as an important part of what we do. So when we moved offices, we decided to develop a kind of range of workshops and different groups which were looking at healthy eating. So if I think back to what we've done over the last year we ran a kind of 2-month cooking group, which was a group for people who really felt very unconfident about their skills in the kitchen, and were also needing to cook on a budget. So we looked at those two things: how can you cook cheaply, and how can we build people's confidence in the kitchen. The course lasted for 6 weeks, and what we looked at were dishes that were cheap to make and were healthy and were easy. So some examples of things we made were soups, which are a good thing that you can kind of freeze. You know, you make lots of portions at once, and then it's easy to kind of unfreeze those and have those when you need them. It's healthy as well, and it's cheap. We looked at food. So what we found was a lot of people who felt unconfident in the kitchen were eating a lot of takeaway foods, which are actually really expensive, often very high in fat and salt and sugar and all those things. So we looked with people, how can we replicate those foods that you enjoy as a takeaway meal, but make them yourselves, make them cheaply and make them healthily. I think one of the misconceptions that people often have is that eating healthily is expensive, and that's a real block, and people think, well, why would I bother cooking for myself, because it costs more, and to be able to afford the things that are good for me, well, that's just out of my price range. Actually, there's a lot of meals that people can make really cheaply which are really healthy. Like I mentioned, you know, pastas, baked potatoes, soups, stir fries. If you're buying seasonal vegetables at the right time of year, so we looked at that with people, then that's going to be cheaper. It's not just going to be cheaper though, it's going to be tastier, they're going to, yeah, be fresher and better for you. You know, they're going to be having more vitamins and minerals and stuff in. So I think it's people feeling that they've got a repertoire of dishes that they're comfortable with. Another thing that we've looked at, or if I was working with somebody on a one-to-one basis, we might do sort of budgeting and planning for going out on a shopping trip. So I would look with them, okay, how much money do you have to spend a week on food? What are the things you like? What are the things that are good for you? Let's go to the supermarket together and see what you can afford. And what I would do is see what people are buying and then see how we can make those choices cheaper. So sometimes people aren't looking, you know, they just go for the brand that they're familiar with rather than looking at the whole shelf and saying, ah, that's on 2 for 1, so I'll go for that one, and maybe buy a couple to keep in the cupboard to use in future. So things like that, how can we substitute, you know, more expensive brands for cheaper ones, explaining to people that actually often it's the same thing inside the tin or, you know, the packet, that it's the packaging that's different, but actually it's going to taste the same. One of the most important things about the groups that we've done around cooking and healthy food has been the social aspect of them. And people really enjoy cooking together and then eating together, and I think that does a number of things. People compliment each other when they're cooking, so that helps to build people's confidence. They think, actually what I've made is good and other people are enjoying it, so I'll do it again. I think it gives people motivation, the motivation to kind of work on their cooking skills. So if they're coming back together, say, oh, I tried this, this was nice, you know, here's the recipe or whatever, sharing recipes. The confidence to ask friends or family to come and eat with them if they live on their own, which I think can be really important, because sometimes if you're just cooking for yourself, it's difficult to find the motivation to sort of, you know, spend all the time preparing a meal and so on. Lots of people find that if they're cooking for somebody else, then there's that added motivation to make something nice. And also I think it's really helped for people who are quite socially isolated. It's a really nice sort of non-pressurised way of coming together with other people, sharing experiences, maybe about living with HIV, so, you know, maybe about, they'll have conversations about medication or whatever while they're, you know, chopping carrots or, you know, stirring a pot of soup or whatever it is. And it feels a lot less threatening for some people than maybe coming to a conventional support group. So if I'm working with somebody on a one-to-one basis and they want to look at their eating, then often I'll look with them at the emotional associations they have with food and how food makes them feel. So we might start by keeping a food diary, looking at what they're eating during a week, and maybe that's all we do to start with, just look at what their eating patterns are. And then the next stage might be to keep them recording what they're eating, but then say, how do you feel after eating each meal, or, you know, the snacks that you're having or whatever it is. So then we start to sort of unpick some of the emotional stuff, and if people aren't eating well, often there is an emotional angle to that. Either they're comfort eating, or they're feeling, if they're feeling potentially a bit depressed or experiencing high levels of anxiety, that can do two things, I guess. One, physiologically, if you're feeling very anxious all the time, often that has an impact on your appetite and you feel less hungry and so on. If you're feeling depressed, then sometimes people, you know, their sense of self-worth is affected by that, and so if you're not valuing yourself, then it follows that you're not going to kind of put good fuel into yourself, because you think, I'm not worth it, I'm not worth sort of investing in that kind of way. So I would try and work with people on some of those issues, and just help them to start to make those connections, really is where we would begin with that work, because often I find people haven't thought about that, they haven't thought about food in that way. And they haven't thought about the fact that actually eating well can make them feel better. It can make not only your body feel better, but it can help with your mind. And that can be because, obviously, if you're eating well, physiologically you're going to be functioning better and you're going to feel better as a result of that. But also it's about investing in yourself, and, you know, preparing yourself a nice meal, sitting down and enjoying it is can make you feel good about yourself. You're saying to yourself, I'm worth it. When we're thinking about immune boosting foods, which is something that we've run workshops on in the past, we would maybe give people advice about everyday foods which have been shown to boost people's immunity. And there's actually loads of these. Some of them are quite well known about, like oranges, for example, high in vitamin C. Others are less well known about. For example, red peppers have twice as much vitamin C as oranges, but not everybody knows that. So while red peppers aren't the cheapest vegetable on the shelf, the fact that they've got that much vitamin C packed into them, especially if you're buying them kind of as fresh as possible, then it's a good investment in those terms. Less well known about immune boosting foods are things like broccoli, which is actually high in vitamin C. Not many people tend to know that. It's antibacterial and it has some kind of antiviral properties. So that's another really great one that we would encourage people to eat. And there's lots of herbs and spices as well which have been shown to be useful. An example would be turmeric, which is a really good anti-inflammatory, so it's good for people who have maybe arthritic pains or you know, stomach problems which might be linked to inflammation. And there's some interesting research actually which has linked the reduced rates of certain kinds of cancer in Asia to turmeric consumption. It's important not to oversell these things, but it's just interesting to think about, I think, and an interesting way to sort of motivate people to explore the properties of different foods. Another thing that I might look at with people around eating is mindfulness techniques, which are well known for dealing with kind of anxiety and depression, but maybe a little bit less well known about in terms of helping with eating. And that's about really teaching people to kind of stop and pay attention to what they're eating and how they feel both while they're eating and afterwards. And that can help in lots of ways. I think it teaches people to enjoy their food. If you're enjoying your food, then you're likely to make healthier choices. It teaches you to notice what tastes good, and often if we're guided by what actually tastes good or what makes us feel good, we'll start to make healthier choices. And I'm part of the community. You're just going to have loads of outtakes. Yeah,